Thank you. First of all, welcome. And maybe we'll learn, at least I'm here to learn something from these great three panel speakers to understand about what are these freaking bot attacks. Why is it that we are still talking after this, after 15 years, 20 years, why are they coming into existence till now? So to start with, maybe I'll throw the question and start very, very basic. Puroo, in your own words, what are these bot attacks? Why do you see this surge now happening?
So I think when you look at bot attacks, these things have been around for a long time. If you look at the industry statistics, actually, right now, I'll move away from here. If you look at the industry stats, almost about 30% of the traffic that you see in the networks today is actually malicious bot traffic. Not many people actually realize that it's that volume of traffic. But again, when you think about these bot attacks, I mean, I think if you put it most simply, you essentially have different sets of computers and workstations and endpoints, which essentially a threat actor can take control of. You can think of it as either a peer-to-peer or kind of more of a hub and spoke model. But essentially, they're all controlled by a separate, kind of call it a control server, or essentially a control item there. And those are essentially what they use to take control of these different computers and then use that to drive havoc, whether that's phishing attacks, whether that's a denial of service attack, any of those kinds of things. So, I mean, these things have been around for a long time, but they're starting to get more and more and more prevalent now, and we're starting to see a lot of threat actors take advantage of these for interesting reasons.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
Well, lately, if we look into the latest breaches, and specifically two major breach, or compilation of breaches. The major one is COMB and MOAB. So COMB is combination of major breaches. So basically it's a compile stack, if you will, of passwords, emails, PII information. And then if you read a little bit of the news, there's another one called MOAB, or Mother of All Breaches. This one contains 26 billions of PII information, again, compiled data. So basically, if we focus really on the bots leveraging identity, and we can talk about credential stuffing, brute forcing, and whatnot. Basically, the reason why bots are very popular is two things. A lot of data leakage, so they're leveraging stack of those twos and more of data that they can use with ML. And the other thing is the cheapness of things. You can buy bots right now, like a subscription, like a Netflix subscription. We're talking, $40, $50 a month. You can have a bot that's going to be leveraged for breach Ticketmaster. If you want to go and buy Taylor Swift tickets, you want to buy tickets for Super Bowl, you can use bots. And you pay basically that fee, a monthly fee of $40, $50 a month, and you can leverage them within the platform. They're going to learn the way that the platform is behaving. They're going to mimic it, and I can dig a little bit deeper later on different types that the bots use to accomplish that. But basically, that's the reason why it's out there. It's because it's cheap. You get support for them, so they give you support on top of it. So you can call them, your ML has issues, you can call the devs at those bots, and they're going to help you out to whatever plan you have, if it's a bad plan or a good plan. But anyways, there's more to it.
So like any security problem, bots have not gone away. If you look back historically, we're facing a lot of the same threats over and over again. And the reason that these are in use is because they're effective. You can consider bots to be a tool set of miscreants or competitors or whatever. You see them used in scraping very often, like we said, account takeover, phishing. And the reason that it's so prevalent is because it works extremely effectively. Like we said, there's a wealth of information available to make them better. And the targets just continue to multiply. State of the art for mitigating bots for a long time was CAPTCHA, and nobody likes that, and CAPTCHA farms have rendered that kind of useless as a defense. So we expect to see it continue to grow. And there's all manner of bots. There's DDoS bots, which have been with us for quite a long time. There's rent to use for different types of account attacks as well. There are good bots out there as well. We haven't talked a lot about that, but there are some that are useful for normal operation of the internet. So we're expecting to see it continue to be a problem.
Okay. So basically you're saying like it is becoming a BaaS, like bots as a service. So that's where it is, accessibility is there. So that's where you see the surge in these attacks. Like maybe Paul, I'll talk to you offline. Like I need to buy tickets for ICC cricket tournament that's happening in North America. Maybe we'll need some bots for sure, so that like I might score some tickets. I'm not interested in the Taylor Swift one, but like this one I definitely am. Anyway, where every year, like when I attend these conferences, there are all these buzzwords that are there for like 2 to 3 years, right? Like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, everybody was talking about data, and like before that, like it was cloud, and like now anywhere you go in, like it becomes, I have to ask this question, AI, right? Like where that is the new trend. So with the whole Gen AI part of it, like as well as the increase in the usage of AI, do you see that like are these correlated, the increase in the bot attacks and especially the false positives, everything happening? Maybe I'll start from Neal, you, and then like I'll come this way. So do you really think that like there is AI is playing some hand in this, or like these are completely unrelated?
AI is a useful automation tool for miscreants in general. So some things that come to mind, automating the attack and doing reconnaissance, especially using bots to augment that, to feed data into a model. But the basic idea is you can use these large language models to develop code for exploits, and then use bots to push them out at all the targets you have at once. You can use it to study the targets as well and find out what their defenses look like, automate an attack towards that. We expect to see more of that. And there's a wealth of other areas where Gen AI is getting used. It's in impersonation, and you can think of bots as very crude now ways of impersonating a user in order to gain access to something. Over time, as our methods of validating credentials, be they photographic or even video, you can expect these bots to be able to do more and more with that. I met with an insurance company recently who was using video with holding up a driver's license as a way of, validating identity. You can expect bots to develop these kind of capabilities over time as well. So more of a almost live interactive way of gathering information and harvesting it.
Yeah, and basically there's multiple types of attacks leveraging AI. Now, well, more MLs. If you look at session harvesting and you look into denial of servicing, race condition attacks as well. Basically, using on the client side, using data from the client side. So all those cookies that client side is giving to the bot, right? That's the main problem. Is we're giving JavaScript, we're giving cookies. So the bots are learning from those elements and using them against against the cart or against the e-commerce platform. They're using now they can use fuzzing now to create, basically look for vulnerabilities and then learn and use them directly into those attacks. Session harvesting, the same thing, right? They can learn from the site and basically create multiple sessions. And with those multiple sessions, they can create a lot of havoc. You can imagine when I'm saying multiple, we're talking could be a lot. So there's no really limits to it. So it's just going to expand, and it will expand for sure.
Yeah. Puroo, before you answer, like maybe I'll throw a completely different question to you, because I think based on your role, like, so we're talking about the bot attacks, but like looking at it from your side, like as a CISO, so what are you going to do differently to really make sure that like you are prepared for this surge?
So I think my peers here will obviously talk a lot about some of the technical things that you can do here. But to me, I think it still boils down a lot into culture and culture within the organization. Because if you think about where a lot of these attacks kind of stem from and kind of one of the primary vectors that they use, it all has to do with kind of security awareness. How are these phishing emails kind of coming through? And is your workforce ready to take on the threats that are coming from these phishing emails and be able to recognize those, right? Do you have the appropriate controls in place, right, to detect some of these phishing emails that are coming through? Similarly, it's a culture as well when you think about kind of the hygiene that's there related to this, right? So when you think about things like multi-factor authentication or even the passwords that you have, Like, as part of my role, I look at kind of cybersecurity across 80 to 100 different portfolio companies. I've lost track of how many companies have kind of very, very simple passwords or no password rules whatsoever. So this is where, again, you get this culture aspect of this, which is very, very important. And you need to have that balanced with the technical controls in order to be able to kind of mitigate these bot attacks.
Yeah. No, very well said, like, because I feel that like the weakest link in security is always our employees, our people, because I think you can make your infrastructure, your stuff like as strong as possible, but like if they are not aware, if they are not trained well, and if that culture is not there, like where you still are exposing it. So coming back to, I'll shift the gears a bit, like, and we talked a lot about technology, what is a bot attack, what it is there, but coming from if you take a step back and look at what is happening in the world, there is a lot of political things that are happening around the world, and like I don't want to go into any specific ones, but like, do you really think that like this political uncertainty is playing a role in this surge? And like maybe Paul, I'll start with you and then like go that side.
Well, I guess it is. Yeah, I mean, I just touched a little bit of the ability from a hacker perspective to purchase bots on the internet for a very low cost. State actors are creating their own bots, building their own bots, and they're using it for different purposes, right? Obviously, to gather intel. It's just, if we look at it, you're in a war, you need to gather as much intel as possible. So they're using it for multiple purposes, slightly different than from necessarily stealing identity and PII information. They're looking typically to look for trying to gather intel to plan next attacks, gather as much of information that they could. For 100% that they are leveraging bots, and they're leveraging the ML portion of it, because as I stated, the bots now are so much able to understand data and gather data and then consume that data and then use it later on. Another aspect of it that is quite important, a little bit off topic, but I need to push that one in, is the ability. Yes, bots, they will find a way in, but we need if the end goal of this conversation was really around identity. So one thing it's important is as well to have a tick security on the identity stack part. So if it is privilege access management or endpoint privilege management, where if you're able to do account takeover, ATOs, to have at least a policy in place, a structure in place around the identity stack, around even from a government perspective or on the commercial side.
So I would say the key place we've seen a lot of attacks that relate to the nation state backing is in DDoS, where bots are used with sophisticated capabilities to do things like use HTTPS, modulate their attack signatures in sub 5-minute intervals, easy ways to operate those. And when the current war that we're dancing around started, we saw that cyber attack start about 3 months before that. And it's generated a lot of chaos. It's generated a lot of advanced capabilities being added by everyone in that space, which is useful for everyone. But the nation-state attacker tools tend to get propagated out into the general population as in use for other things. One way is to make money, just renting the use of the tools. Ransom campaigns, the ransomware threat that most people think about now is encrypting a database and pulling it back. But if you look back to early 2000s, ransomware was, I'm going to take your site down unless you pay me, in sort of the old protection racket. That comes back periodically, and uses these bots a lot. The other area where you'll see them used in sophisticated campaigns by states is to harvest credentials that might be useful for gaining information about individual people that can be useful for mounting a more sophisticated identity attack. People with privileges typically. We all have multiple accounts all over the place. All of our passwords have been compromised in dozens of commerce and social media sites, and those things are out there. And what they give people access to is a ton of PII that will be useful for doing a much more targeted attack. And you're going to see more and more of that kind of thing used to augment attacks in general.
Puroo?
So one of the other things you're also going to see with kind of these state nations and some of the threat actors that are coming from there, as part of these bots, they're using the bots and the AI together to actually drive news articles. So what they're doing is they're having these bots kind of look at kind of some of the news sources and news articles and generate fake news in a very similar style. And if you think about this right now, if you go onto something like a ChatGPT or anything, you can ask it to create a news article and say, give me a news article in the style of CNN or in the style of NBC. And it'll actually generate it, and you'll see kind of different styles of news articles emerge. That's what these bots are doing now. They're using these kind of LLMs to generate those kinds of news articles in that way. So it's really interesting in terms of how these threat actors are getting more creative with this and leveraging the tools that are out there now and that have especially come up in the last year or so with these LLMs.
Yeah. No, it's a very interesting take that you take, Puroo, is saying that like where from maybe a couple of years ago, bot attacks was mostly looked as like a DDoS, like on my website or any public, like whether it's an e-commerce one or like any front-facing. But like what you're bringing is like it is not even about like coming onto your particular website, but like there is a lot of information that is misrepresented, which can alternatively affect your business in some shape or form. No, that's great. And like while I'm having these questions, like I want to see if there is any big questions that is in any of your mind that you want to ask. Please raise your hand while like so that like I can manage the time and like I want to really get to it, like and think about it. While I ask like one question to Neal, is Neal, you talked about the good bots, like where like I think we always talk about bots as bad, but like where you talked about some good bots. Do you want to explain a bit on that?
So I think the first good bot that we all think about from old days is the Google bot. It goes out and indexes websites for useful, search. Lots of those are still out there doing similar things. Sometimes your business partners are going to have bots that they use in order to do, all manner of interaction with the site. Sometimes it's simple as, there's some automated polling or probe that happens. Identifying the different behaviors among those becomes increasingly challenging as you see attempts to replicate that behavior on both sides. But generally speaking, there's a whole class of bots that you want to be able to see that you want to be able to have happen. Sometimes it's, you want to facilitate scraping of price because you want to be in a price index. And there's a lot of that that's out there that's hugely important to businesses that we don't tend to think about, because one answer to bot management is I want to identify every automated behavior and subtract it from the traffic. It's not quite so simple.
Yeah. No. Okay. Paul, like I'll ask a different question to you, like where this is always an interesting question for me. Is these bot attacks, like are they targeted or like they are like much more on like throwing that net and seeing like which one sticks? Like so how do they work? What is this modus operandi to really look at it?
They can be targeted to so many things, right? So like I mentioned earlier, it could be targeted to ticketing system. It could be targeted at sneaker stores to try to purchase and then for resell or e-commerce. Or again, on the F&I side, right? They have their own e-commerce platforms. They want to do account takeovers to try to either purchase mortgages. I've seen those a lot. So there's a multitude of different targetings, and there's a different models to apply to different styles of attacks. On a little bit on the defensive side of things is interesting, especially on the F&I side. You'll see that the bots now are very slow, so they try to mimic a human behavior. So typically, you're going to see them really going slow, taking their time, clicking, trying to mimic human behavior. So typically, InfoSec will not detect them because they're really hard to detect. But fraud, on the other side, typically going to find them because they know the typical behavior. If you see them doing scraping, doing multiple touching browsers going all over, they'll see that on the fraud side. The important part, I think, from a defensive side, is to have fraud on InfoSec work a little bit together more. Because typically InfoSec is going to say, no, it's not a bot. You know, we look at behavior, no. So that's important to have those two combined to make a more defensive way to basically tackle them. Other aspect of it is all the cookies in JavaScript that I mentioned earlier as well. That is quite important to try to avoid to give them, because more you give, more they learn, right?
What I've also seen here with some of these bots, again, as you start going into different types of organizations, when you think about kind of targeted, a lot of the AI behind these bots is now starting to look at how can I evade and how can I start to find out different ways of moving within the environment. So what some of these bots are doing now, I mean, they're trying to kind of mask and kind of shift around where some of the control servers are coming from. So the ones that are actually controlling the actual bots, right? That's kind of one lever that they use. Another one that they're kind of looking at is how do we change some of the encryption protocols as we're going along, right? So what you're basically seeing is this shift towards more of a dynamic threat actor, whereas in the past and kind of where we started our conversation today was more around these things have been around for a long time, but they used to be very static before. You used to have kind of one control server and then kind of that used to be controlling these. Now you have this environment where not only are the bots themselves turning on and off, the actual servers that are controlling these are changing and being masked and being encrypted. So it becomes very, very difficult for you to start to recognize and detect how these things are coming and operating within the environment.
Yeah. No, maybe we call them the iBots, like where the intelligent bots, like where this is the next version. Maybe I should patent this. Anyway, coming back to it, like where when you're getting ready from a security perspective for these kind of attacks, what you also see is like when the bot attacks are going up and like when you put in any infrastructure or like any device or like anything, like from a solution perspective, there are a lot of false positives that come into this. So, and the handling that false positive becomes a very, very big thing for the teams that are there, like who are actually managing it. So how do you deal with that? Like, are there any things that like you need to be doing? I don't know, whoever wants to take that question can take that question.
So one of the ways that we might think about bots is a form of automation. Automating some of the learning from false positives, and this is a great way to use machine learning. A lot of modern SIM integration and log ingestion products support creating data lakes that enable you to mine and figure out which of the false positive, false negatives that you've classified make sense, and it can infer from your behavior as operators exactly what's more likely to be, so you can reduce the overall false positive that way. But bots are automated behaviors, automating some of your response where you can, and generative AI is a great way to start thinking about that idea. And on the defensive side, how do you augment a SOC's ability to think about these sorts of problems, and percolate to the top in the sea of events that all of these things give you, which ones are actually going to be important. So when I think false positive, I think classifying important versus maybe not quite so important, and starting to suppress a lot of other things that might not be, but you can be continually mining that suppression to find out if there's something in there that's worth percolating up as well.
Another important aspect of that is understanding the behavior of the regular user, so more of the user experience. And you're going to see this more and more on the next generation toolings around bot defense. It's a word they call it orchestration now. We can divert a little bit, but the important part is really to understand the user experience. And when you understand the user experience, basically you can then define the bots, because typically the bot's going to behave slightly different, and it's more easier to detect them. Obviously, honeypotting is another way to understand what they're doing, and as well send them false information, so they kind of turn around as well during a while. But all this, once you understand really the user flow, if you will, into again on eShop commerce or F&I style of applications, it's much more easier then to apply defensive stack around it.
I think if I bring it back to some of the basics, and again, for those of you that were in the keynote speaker from this morning, Chris Roberts, I think he said it very well. Do you understand what you own? Do you have a good visibility into what your asset inventory looks like? And is that being cross-referenced across multiple sources? I think that's one of the good ways to actually detect and understand where some of these bots are and what's coming up new in your environment, because as you automate some of that and start to correlate that between your different asset book of inventories or your XDR tools or some of your other tools that you have within the environment, that's what gives you that visibility here in terms of kind of what could be a bot here versus what is actually something real. And I think a lot of organizations that have kind of become more mature in terms of that journey have started to move more towards that automated detection, and I would say more so the exception management around those things, which help them then send alerts and detect that, okay, this is probably a bot or it's some sort of unusual behavior in my environment, because it's not something that I recognize that I own within my respective environment.
Amazing. In addition to having the inventory part of it, like asset inventory or what you're doing, like the relationship is like what I feel that like it's also important to say when there is a front-facing asset that is there, how is it linked with other areas that is? So, and once again, it comes to having to zero trust and like where, like how do you segregate that, like and make sure that like if it happens, the risk can be minimized and mitigated. Any questions from the audience? Like anything, anybody? John? I know you're not listening, so that's why I picked on you.
Of course I'm listening.
Yeah. So.
I was trying to think of a good question to ask you, but I
Yeah. Now, so I'll continue on this. Like there are a couple of things where we'll talk about the mitigation part of it. Like what are the I know there are big organizations. You were talking about F&I, you're talking about e-commerce, Paul, but like I think majority of the companies like fall under that like SMB sector where they don't have that much of a capacity to really defend against this. But if I had a minimalistic budget, like what is the biggest low-hanging fruit that like they can do to really mitigate this? Yes.
Well, there's a few things. So actually, my colleague earlier was talking about denial of service. Typically, denial of service attacks will typically target risk-based tools. So typically on a website, you can have risk-based tools. The risk-based tool is going to give a score. If you're below the score, right, you're okay. You're above, you're going to get blocked. So typically, denial of service is going to attack those vendors. Typically, very short attacks, 20 seconds, 30 seconds attacks, going to bring them down. Basically, they're going to do whatever they need to do. That risk base is completely down. One important aspect to that is the ability to find risk-based vendors that are able to give you back performance logs real time. Mm-hmm. So you need to have that real time, not with a huge delay, because then you can stack it on your own tools. You'll know that that risk-based vendor is down. So you can try to find another way, right? It could be using your first-party information, right? And you reuse your first-party information instead in multiple other ways. The other part that I was telling you about is really the ability to not give cookies, JavaScripts. That's a low-hanging fruit, not expensive. Less you give, more you feel, kind of thing.
I remember some good old days when you could send a bot an HTTP redirect and it would be unable to follow it. Now then you got headless browsers that could respond to cookie requests and all sorts of things. Among the more contemporary responses that are useful, some sort of proof of work, we call it a crypto challenge sometimes, give the bot some problem to solve cryptographically that it will do, and then it comes back, and if it maintains a suspicion level, you can keep giving it more work to do until it becomes inoperable. Really useful technique. If we're dealing with the kind of bots that are doing account takeovers and credential stuffing. You can also use device attestation. Is it really a mobile device? There are different techniques for doing that work incredibly well. In terms of smaller organizations we talked about who maybe don't have the manpower to own these sorts of things, there are a whole bunch of managed services that do this for you now, that use very contemporary advanced techniques at all price levels for solving the problem. Smaller doesn't necessarily mean that the solution is going to also still be stratospheric. Smaller companies tend to have smaller numbers of applications out there. There are lots of ways to fight the problem. So I would encourage everyone to look for some sort of managed service just to see where it is. You might be surprised, the exoticness of the price.
Yeah. No?
So I think another thing which is, which again for some of these smaller companies is really just focusing more on a layered defense approach. So rather than kind of looking at kind of point individual kind of solutions that can be there to attack this, figure out kind of how you can beef up that layered defense approach across each of the different areas, right? So that can start all the way from kind of your identity and access management stack and your tools and capabilities that you have there. You can look at kind of from a security awareness perspective in your email gateways, do you have the right kind of authentication protocols? Do you have the right kind of controls in place? Do you have the right warnings that you're alerting your users when something is coming in that could look suspicious? Do you have the right kind of filtering things set up? And are those things that you have within your environment, are they set up and hardened and configured properly? What a lot of organizations find is they purchase the Cadillacs when it comes to a lot of these different tools and solutions, but have they configured the Cadillacs to actually work in the way that they're supposed to work? And more importantly, are they actually following the kind of, do they have the right process behind that technology? And is that something which is in place? So I would say from my perspective, more of that building up that layered defense approach, whether it's at the network layer, whether it's at the application layer, whether it's at the email layer, but putting in place those different controls at all of those different levels so that kind of as these bot attacks mature and they can come in from all different angles, if one control doesn't stop it, you have a better chance of stopping it with some other approaches there.
Yeah. So we talked, probably this might be last question from my side, like looking at the time, but like where we talked about the origin, we talked about the prevention part of it. Now I want to see like if it happens, what next? And like how are you going to, what are the things that like we need to be worried, like, and what are the first steps that we should be taking? Anybody can.
Okay, so in the context of if it happens, I guess, to put some framework around it, if you have a mass compromise of credentials, the most important thing is to shut the service off until you get a handle on what's happening and then notify users. Find all of the accounts as fast as you can, and like I said, there's a lot of automation available for harvesting your own logs to figure that out. But to contain it so that it doesn't spread, so put a stop to it right away. From there, disclosure is now mandatory, and being completely upfront and honest about exactly what it was and how it happened. The people who get punished the most for breaches nowadays are the ones who leave detail out in the explanation. I've seen even major, Fortune 10 companies offer fully embarrassing accounts of exactly what happened and what they did about it, who it affected. Goes a long way towards engendering the trust for your users. As owners of usernames and passwords now, credit cards, things like that, we're all used to getting that notice that says your card's been owned or finding out it has. It's not even like, that's not in the top 10 things that you worry about financially anymore, because they just send you a new card and you're fine. Usernames and passwords, same thing. Everybody has a struggle remembering the universe of passwords they have. When one gets compromised, you're like, okay. So users, I think, are much more conditioned to that and don't consider it a serious breach unless it's something that got far and people knew was happening and didn't tell right away.
Yeah, if we look at breaches like the latest one from Okta as an example, really quickly on, even if they're able to get in to an account takeover to a certain extent, the goal once they're there, right, it's to move up, move laterally, or move up. At the end of the day, what they want is the ability to gain as much power as they can on the identity front, right? So the thing is, from an identity perspective, is to have structures in place where basically, even if they're able to get an account takeover, to limit the spreading, right? Yes, shutting down servers, but on the inside, right? If they're able to gain to AD, if they're able to gain into API stack, you want to have a good control and grasp on your privilege accounts. And this is where solutions come into play to obviously privilege access management and whatnot, but really prevent those privilege accounts to be stolen, basically. And that's where rotation of those passwords, using vaults and whatnot, will prevent the spread of attacks. Even if they're able to come in and get access to one account, second account, they'll be limited. And tying back to the Okta story, was pretty much this, right? They were able to get in, but with very limited access. Once that attack was found, they couldn't do much. They opened up a VPN, they tried to create accounts via APIs, but they were limited because Okta was able to flag it. We're able to flag it. So basically, the limitation of the rest of the attack was limited to a certain point.
So I've got 5 words for you. Follow your incident response plan, right? So I think step number 1, do you have an incident response plan? Have you tested your incident response plan? And does your incident response plan cover these kinds of scenarios, right? You'll be surprised how many organizations have kind of put an incident response plan or have one with their managed service provider, but what kind of scenarios? How many of you have asked? Like in most organizations, it's a checkbox. Do you have an incident response plan? Yeah, we have one, right? But what does that mean, right? Does your incident response plan have scenarios like we just talked about? Does it have a scenario in there around bot attacks? Do you have a scenario? I mean, most of them have some scenarios around data breaches or ransomware or things like that. But do you have these different scenarios outlined, and have you tested it? And then as you've tested it, have you looked at some of the other types of things that could happen if you were to get into a bot attack? What happens if you need to rebuild your AD? When was the last time you backed up your AD? When was the last time you've rebuilt and tested the rebuild of your AD? Right? These are the types of things from a resiliency standpoint which are super, super important when it comes to these kinds of attacks. But it's an area where I think, again, a lot of organizations kind of make a high-level kind of plan just to check the box that we have one. But they actually need to test these things out and look at some of the other scenarios that play out and make sure that these things are working and they're tested out with the business, working with technology in conjunction.
Oh, that's great. So have an incident response plan and update it regularly as well? Yeah. Or and do the exercise?
Absolutely.
Okay. No. Tabletop exercises, yeah. Both with your team as well with your executive team as well as the board. I think everybody needs to be in because if you don't keep them informed those are the people who are going to ask questions. Anyway, so this has been great. Thank you, Neal, thank you, Paul, thank you, Puroo, for a wonderful session. At least for sure. I learned a bit about the bot attacks. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.